Hi everyone, this is Patrick Palucci with Slooh Space Camera. It's August 31st. Thank you for joining us today to cover the Blue Moon event. Also, we will be doing a live solar feed of the sun. And in addition, we will be paying a tribute to the late, great Neil Armstrong. When we first started this show with Slooh on Slooh.com, we plan our shows typically anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks out. And we were definitely going to always cover the Blue Moon event, as this is the last one and for another couple of years. But with the unfortunate passing of Neil Armstrong over the weekend, we decided to extend this show to an hour. And I fortunately was able to get not only Bob Berman to join us for this, but also Duncan Copp, who's a filmmaker with a lot of projects around the Apollo program, which he'll be coming on in about 20 minutes. But before we get started here, I'm going to go ahead. We're pulling live feeds of both the sun and the moon. And I'm going to click over right now to the moon that we're showing. And with us, we have several gentlemen. Anyone who's been on any of our free shows on the homepage of Slooh.com knows Bob Berman. He's a longtime Slooh friend, astronomy magazine columnist, and of course, author of many books, including one on the shooting to the moon. And with us also is Matt Francis from Prescott Observatory in Arizona. He's actually giving us a live views of the sun right into this hangout environment. These will also be available on the Slooh.com homepage, these feeds. We are pulling them live, and if you go to the Slooh.com homepage, you can control these feeds yourself in the channel selector when the show clicks over officially, which it probably already has right now. And also with us is Paul Cox, a Slooh engineer. He's actually controlling what we call our T1 observatory in the Canary Islands, a world-class site, which is about 8,000 feet up. And you're looking at a live image right now that I've got here, showing right now. So Bob, as we get started here looking at this amazing live shots of the moon and the sun, where would you like to start? Perhaps you'd like to talk more about Neil Armstrong a little bit and maybe some of the lunar, some of the Apollo programs.
Well, of course, Neil Armstrong is famous from the very first lander, Apollo 11. Everybody knows that. But perhaps the best use of our time would be to talk about the little-known aspects of that first landing on the moon that made Neil Armstrong so very famous. And those who are controlling their own computers right now, go to the feed. The best one would be the low power view. In other words, keep scrolling until you see Slooh's live low power wide field image of the moon, and that one I think will show it best. And the Sea of Tranquility, Mare Tranquillitatis, where the first Apollo astronauts landed on July 20th of 1969, is that dark blotch. The first, it looks like a double dark blotch just to the right of center. It's the lower part of it. It looks like a black hourglass or the number 8. Go to the center of the moon, just look to its right, and the bottom part of that is the Sea of Tranquility, where they landed. But there's unknown things about it that in writing my book about the moon, in speaking extensively with Buzz Aldrin, who loved publicity. Unlike Neil Armstrong, one of the things that we all admired about Armstrong was that he was shy, he was humble. He did not want the publicity. He did not want the interviews, and you can't really blame him, because people were asking over and over again, what was it like to be on the moon? I mean, how many times can you answer that? Or did you get along with Buzz Aldrin? And there were some negatives in the program. We won't talk about them now, but he certainly didn't want to talk about them. So almost everything about that first landing that's a little juicy and unusual and interesting for us tonight comes from Buzz Aldrin. I'll just tell you a few things as we look at the moon live.
Hey Bob, can I jump in just really quick?
Please do.
If you're on the Slooh.com homepage, right, Bob's talking about the moon, you might want to check out the solar flare that Matt just captured live at the Solar AZ feed. Just go to the homepage and select it. If you have a Pinterest account, you can pin that photo and send it to your friends. It's pretty cool, Matt. Congrats for getting that. Sorry, Bob, go ahead.
No, that's great. And I know we're going to be looking at the sun later. The sun is just exploding in some ways. You know, that's one of the great things about that nearest star, is that, it's the giver of life and all that. But on the sun, it's always the apocalypse. It's always the end of the world, and we can see that so clearly tonight. But back to the moon. Here's some of the little known things that happened. I think everybody realizes that they were almost running out of fuel on that first lander, and the reason for that is that Neil Armstrong, ably steering the lunar lander down towards the surface, kept getting warning lights. 60 seconds left of fuel, then 30 seconds left of fuel, and yet the place he was heading was a boulder field that would have knocked the lander over sideways or on its side, and that would have meant death to both of them. And beyond that, there was a crater. If you landed on that, you'd be at such an angle that it would again topple over. So he knew he had to get past those things, or at least to the right of them. So he had to steer it to that landing site. And once they got there, we all think that the first words on the moon were, that's one small step for man, etc. It actually was Buzz Aldrin who said, "Okay, engines stop." Right? Those were the first words from the moon. Engine stop. And speaking of which, Neil Armstrong steered that so perfectly that he changed the design of the lander. It had legs, Pat, that were made of honeycombed compressible aluminum, and the thing was supposed to hit the moon with a little bit of an impact. In other words, as soon as he got the contact light signal on his panel, he was supposed to shut the engines off, and it was to drop the final 3 feet, compressing the legs. Well,
Right.
he was so gentle when he landed it that the legs did not compress. So when he stepped out of the hatch, now the hatch was only 2 feet 8 inches wide, so he had to just barely squeeze out of the hatch and walk down the ladder. The ground was much farther than it had been planned. And that's why he had to let go and fall. He couldn't even see the bottom
Wow.
because it was in shade. And on the moon, shadow is pitch black. It's not like on Earth where you get some reflections and some skylight. Nothing on the moon, just absolutely pitch black. So when he landed, boom, that was quite a hard step. Of course, there's controversy over the first thing he said on the bottom. Did he say that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind, which would have made more sense, or one small step for man, which sort of made less sense? Doesn't matter. Everybody cheered. Even if he had ordered a pizza, everybody would have cheered. First person on the moon. Now here's where it gets strange. First of all, this was all done in prime time. The original plan was to have these two guys rest up after their lander, but that would have made them step out in the wee hours of the morning, and nobody in America would be up to see it. So the guys were all psyched up. They were hyped up. They were over-caffeinated. They said, no, we're ready for a spacewalk now. So they went out during prime time in the United States. 19 minutes later, Buzz Aldrin did the same thing, and when he went out, he said, "I'm going to leave that door open a little bit." And Neil Armstrong, already on the surface, said, "Yeah, that's a good idea. You don't want to lock it." And some of us were saying, was that even possible? Could they lock themselves out of the spacecraft on the moon?
Oh
But
my God.
nonetheless, these guys were talking about it. See, these are some of the little known things about it. And then Buzz Aldrin steps down on the surface, and because it was a far distance, as soon as he landed, the impact broke the urine bag that was inside his boot. He didn't want to say anything because he had a live mic, but nonetheless, he had his boot filled with urine from that point on, and his walking on the surface of the moon could have been characterized as one small squish for a man, because that's what he had to do, squish around. So there are all sorts of interesting little known things going on there.
Yeah, if you guys are just joining us, you can actually, if you have a mobile device, Android or iPhone device or iPad device, you can actually watch and listen to this broadcast right now live. Just so you know, we're here with Bob Berman, from longtime Slooh editor and Astronomy Magazine columnist. We got Matt Francis from Prescott Observatory in Arizona showing us live solar feeds, which I'll show you guys a little bit of. Matt, fantastic shots coming in. He's also, we got live images coming in from what we call our homepage viewer. You can look at those and flip through and control some of our own scopes, just the feeds of them, by hitting those arrow buttons. And we have Paul Cox from helping us from actually the UK, controlling our what we call our Canary T1 telescope off the Canary Islands, which is off the coast of Africa. So, and I myself, Patrick Palucci of Slooh, are here in Los Angeles. So we're all over the world right now giving you this live broadcast, and we're actually celebrating, along with Blue Moon, the unfortunate passing of Neil Armstrong and talking more about his life. Bob, maybe you should tell us a little bit about Blue Moon itself and what it means and where it came from. Any kind of background you can provide us.
Yeah, this started because of a misunderstanding in a 1940s astronomy magazine, and that it was actually a mistake in print. But ever since then, it's slowly gone more and more viral until these days, the second full moon in the same calendar month is called a blue moon. That happens every 2.5 years on average. So it's really a little bit more common than once in a blue moon. And because every calendar month is longer, except for February, is longer than the moon's period of phases, which is 29.5 days, it means you'll automatically have a blue moon, a second full moon, as long as there's a full moon lands on the first day of the month, sometimes even the second day of the month. Well, that's what we had. We had our first full moon on August 1st, so today we get the second one, and so it's the blue moon, the full moon tonight.
Excellent. If any of you guys are out there and want to ask questions to Bob or Duncan or myself, go ahead, and we're going to be looking at the chat box Slooh conversation on Slooh.com. That's where we look at that stuff. So if you do have questions to ask Bob or Duncan when he comes on, or even Matt regarding the solar feed itself, feel free to do that, and I'll monitor it through the show. That'll be great. And we'll have Duncan come on in about 10 more minutes here. He's going to join us shortly to talk about his impressions of the Apollo program. He's got a lot of great stories as well on the moon. I also want to bring up that we're actually launching a new program today called Operation My Sky. It's a new program featured around our upcoming iPad app release. If you guys go to slooh.com/mysky, you can learn more about it. We're definitely looking for you guys to take a look at it as far as the perks are concerned, and it's a unique opportunity to help support Slooh outside of our traditional membership program that we offer right now. You can learn more about that as well by clicking the membership link on the slooh.com homepage. Bob, go ahead and let's talk more about the moon itself, since kind of that's the theme of our show today. Can you have any other stories you'd like to highlight before we have Duncan come on?
Oh, well, sure. We talk about the moon. We can talk about Neil Armstrong. I like the wide field, low power image of it, sort of resembling the way the moon would look through binoculars. So those who are near a computer and can click on those blue-green triangles get that low power view, and I think that's the best one. Right now there's no shadowing on the moon. That's what happens when it's full. But by tomorrow night, you'll see the night-day line, called the Terminator, just like in the movies, creep on the moon's surface at 10 miles an hour. It's really slow. The moon has this very slow change in phases. 10 miles an hour. You could jog fast enough to keep night from ever falling. I'd also like to mention that the reason Neil Armstrong went there was because he really proved himself as one of the best test pilots the world ever saw. In the Gemini 8 mission, a malfunction made the spacecraft, which was already attached to the Agena rocket. You see, part of a Gemini's mission was to rendezvous and make contact and attach to other spacecraft. They successfully did it, and then it started spinning like a wild carnival ride. And the two astronauts were almost going to black out. This was almost nearly killed them. But he kept his cool. He detached the other Agena rocket from it, and then it spun even faster, which meant the problem was within his spacecraft, not the spacecraft they attached it to. And he did a very bold thing. He turned off all the engines and ignited the series to return to Earth, which is something you're not supposed to do in that setup, but he saved his life and that of the other crew member. So he was great, and Buzz Aldrin, who was one of the only non-Navy guys to go to the moon. And by the way, he still raves about it. If you get a chance to speak to him personally, he is still ticked off all these years later that he almost didn't go to the moon. And the only reason he went to the moon was because he was on the final Gemini flight. That is, he had never been in space before. It was Gemini 12. And he only did that because the crew that was supposed to be on board got killed in a plane crash, and so he was a replacement crew member. He did so well on Gemini 12 when the computers failed that he single-handedly was able to steer that spacecraft toward a rendezvous with an unseen target craft. They called him Dr. Rendezvous because he was so good. In fact, he was one of the only astronauts with a PhD. So he was selected to Apollo 11 to accompany Neil Armstrong, and the two of them, what a pair they made.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna go ahead and flick over really quick to the sun that Matt is showing us. It's pretty fascinating. Matt, are you there? Can you hear me okay? We're looking at this right now. Matt, we're not getting your audio, so I'm going to keep talking about it.
Oh, look
now,
at
Bob,
that. It's beautiful, yes.
yeah, isn't that awesome? It's we're looking at a live image of the sun right now. I've got this going into our Hangout as we're speaking right now. Bob, let's switch over to the sun, and then when Duncan comes on, we'll go back to the Apollo program a little bit.
Okay.
What can you tell us? You know,
Well,
where do you want to start with this?
I know why you're asking me about the sun. Right
Absolutely, and I'm going to show his book, The Sun Heartbeat. See that? You guys see it okay?
The sun's heartbeat.
Yes, on cue. Bob's on cue. The Sun's Heartbeat. Bob is the author of that book, if you didn't know that already. And it's a great book. I've actually read it, and it's enjoyable. It has a lot of fun stories, and I'm hoping, Bob, you share some of those stories with us right now.
Well, among the things that seem to interest people most about the sun, the quirky, strange things, is that in recent years we found that there is a sun inside the sun. It's like a double sun, and that's brand new. We've never had an armada of spacecraft the way we do now, with names like Source and Stereo and SDO and Trace and ACE and SOHO and watching the sun, and we're making amazing discoveries. We're looking at a live image that Matt is showing us. This is happening right now as a prominence far larger than our planet Earth is leaping up into space from the edge of the sun. And the reason this does it, this is wild stuff, is that we have now found that the inner 70% of the sun is like a solid ball. It spins uniformly. But the outer 30% of the sun has this chaotic rotation where the equator spins at one rate, makes a rotation every 25 days or so, while the poles make a rotation in 35 days. And the boundary between these two suns, the inner one and the outer one, called the tachocline, is the place where its magnetic field is created, which in turn creates these flares and prominences and coronal mass ejections that throw material in our direction. And so the culprit, other than the sun's core way down the middle, which nobody can see, is this odd boundary between the two suns that we never knew existed until 1989. And we're just now learning more about it.
So, Bob, we're getting questions out of the chat room as well, and I'm going to bounce around a little bit so we can answer some of this. Some individuals are asking, does the moon actually change color for the blue moon event? Perhaps you could give us a quick answer to that one.
It would be more dramatic if it did, but no. Despite the name, the moon looks like every other full moon. The other moon that people are expecting to look different is the harvest moon. That's the other famous full moon, which is the closest full moon to the fall equinox, and that looks like every other moon also. Unfortunately for us at Slooh, which has such beautiful color capability, I don't have to tell you, Pat, the objects we show when we're showing galaxies and nebulae are all full color and they're amazing. The moon is colorless. The moon is one of the grayest objects in the known universe. So even though Slooh is bringing true color live images right now, the true color is just gray.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, if you go to the Slooh homepage, guys, you can actually control the feeds that we're offering. There's 4 of them right now. There's 3 moons and 1 solar. And
Pat,
Matt is capturing... Yeah, I certainly can.
Okay, just want to make sure I should be okay now.
Okay, excellent. So, yeah, Matt, we were talking a little bit about that. We've been bouncing around a little bit. Maybe you can give us some idea, Matt. What's happening? What are you using right now when you're looking at the sun? You've got your scope all set up out there in Arizona. It looks like we're getting some activity on the outside there. Do you notice that?
Yeah, what I'm using is a monochromatic planetary camera that has a rather small CCD chip, so the image of the sun, as you see in the wide field of view, so you're seeing almost the entire solar disk there is filling the CCD chip of the camera. The other camera is on the other telescope, and that's what is in the Slooh reticle on my feed, is a much closer up view. Now that flare that you see, the prominence that I've loaded up to the Slooh website, that's at about 2 o'clock on the western limb of the sun. So that's already gone really beyond our field of view. It's rotating towards the
Right.
back of the sun. My next picture that I'll upload will be something that's just rotating around the eastern limb and coming our direction, and it's a rather large sunspot that hopefully will produce some impressive coronal mass ejections.
Yeah, Bob, I'm looking on the solar AZ feed right now on the homepage, and give us some perspective of how big that flare is that you're seeing.
Many times the size of Earth. Just picture that from one side of the sun to the other, you could line up about 108 Earths. Or if you want to think of it this way, by volume, if you could unscrew the top of the sun like a mayonnaise jar, if you could just pour Earths inside, it would take over 1 million Earths to fit inside the sun. So this is a massive item in terms of weight. The sun weighs the same as 333,000 planet Earths. So when you realize the total size of it, you can extrapolate as to what size any of these features are. But all of these prominences on the edge are larger than our entire planet.
Oh, it's just crazy. So I went ahead and invited in documentary filmmaker and producer Duncan Copp. He will probably be joining us shortly, and we'll talk more about some of the projects that he's worked on in the past, including In the Shadow of the Moon and Moon Machines, two movies and TV series that you guys should definitely watch. They're fascinating stuff about the Apollo program and actually the machines that they used. But we'll talk about more of that when he comes in. Bob, what else? One of the things I always thought when I was reading your book is you had some interesting stories about some theories about how the sun and our attempts now to block the sun out of our lives through suntan lotion and other means is actually there's some theories out there of how that might have some medical issues that we're experiencing as human beings now. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, we do a couple of chapters on that in the sun's heartbeat. One guy in particular, John Cannell, who's in the Vitamin D Council, he and the others are almost messianic about this. They so believe that we are hurting ourselves by hiding from the sun. And he's aware, being a medical doctor, that many doctors are warning us, stay out of the sun, put on suntan lotion. But what we're really doing is keeping our vitamin D levels low. And vitamin D may be the greatest anti-cancer agent ever known. So what he and the other members of the Vitamin D Council are saying is that we should all get as much sun as we can without burning. That's the key. You don't want to burn. That's not good for you. But don't hide from the sun. Get more sun. Get those vitamin D levels up, because he's afraid that we're turning into a race of mole people. That just a century ago we had an agricultural society. We were out all day, and many cultures in the world still are out under the sun all day. Then we moved indoors to offices and factories, but now we've done worse. When we're in cars, the glass blocks the vitamin D producing ultraviolet rays. When we're in our homes, the windows block that. Many of us don't even keep our windows open anymore. And because of this, and kids who used to be allowed to play outdoors under the sun after school, and nowadays if a parent says, yeah, go out and play, that's almost a cause to report them to social services as a criminal offense. That kids, because parents are afraid of sexual predators, because kids have gotten into video games and first Nintendo and then the other games, the fear is that children are not getting the natural sunlight that they should be getting, and the consequences of it may be increased asthma and many other diseases. So the bottom line with the sun is it's our friend, not our enemy. Get as much as you can without burning.
Excellent. Well, joining us now is our friend of ours who's been on several shows, including some of our bigger ones, and is Duncan Copp. Duncan, being in the UK, you probably don't have too much problems with the sun, do you, out there?
Not this summer.
Exactly.
We've the wettest summer in 100 years, thanks to a
you guys
dislocated jet stream.
Hey, I just wanted to throw out a quick shout. Yeah, you guys did a great job with the Olympics out there. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I watched a lot of the events, and it looked like the weather out there was pretty good during a lot of the events. So, congrats as well on
We were
that.
quite fortunate with the Olympics. It was an amazing time. I managed to get along to the stadium for some of the athletics, and it was incredible. We had a blast.
That's awesome. So, with us, Duncan Copp is actually a documentary film producer. He's worked on a lot of projects dealing with the Apollo program. You may have seen In the Shadow of the Moon, which actually won an award at I think it was the 2007 Best International Film at Sundance. Is that right? For audience award? Is that how
That's
you
right.
say
Yeah, it was
that?
the audience award, which
All
was
right.
wonderful. Yeah.
Awesome, yeah, and he's also done other projects, The Moon Machines. You may have seen that TV series, and you actually just finished up something you mentioned about with Curiosity for NASA, another project you've done. So, thanks for joining it with us today. Duncan was kind of the last minute addition with the unfortunate passing of Neil Armstrong, and we wanted to talk to Duncan more about some of his experience with talking to the astronauts and the Apollo program in general. And hopefully, we're going to go back to the moon here in the Hangout. You can obviously, on the Slooh.com homepage, control some of these feeds yourself. But Duncan, what could you tell us about Neil Armstrong that maybe some people don't know, or about the Apollo program in general?
Yeah, certainly, Pat. Just a little bit of background. I mean, I was very fortunate to meet and work with quite a few of the astronauts who walked on the moon between 1969 and 1972, almost 40 years ago now. In December this year, it'll be the 40th anniversary of the last moon landing. That was Apollo 17. And during the filming of In the Shadow of the Moon, we got to meet quite a lot of the chaps who had walked on the moon. Unfortunately, Armstrong, in true tradition, declined to take part in our documentary. Bob, I can see you laughing there. But he was a very generous man, and we had some email correspondence, and he was very gracious and wished us the best of luck, and said if he could be any help in any way, he would be willing to do that. But I think really, you just, with somebody like Armstrong, who I think is a rather misconstrued character, certainly in the press, who want to make him out as a recluse and a hermit and didn't go out of the home. I don't believe that for a moment, and in fact anybody who knew him says he wasn't like that. And I have to say, fortunately I didn't get to meet him. I did hear him speak at the Air and Space Museum on the 40th anniversary of the moon landing in 2009, and he was a great orator, really fantastic, and certainly not shy at all. I think from that respect he was rather misconstrued, but I think you just have to respect the man's wishes, which was, at that stage in his life, at least when we were in correspondence, it wasn't much fun for him to spend hours and hours being quizzed by endless documentary filmmakers like myself, as much as I would have liked to have done so. And I think one of the reasons perhaps for that was perhaps his memory wasn't quite as sharp as he would have liked it to be. And I think with that weight on his shoulders, maybe he was just a little bit apprehensive about misremembering some of the events that took place. And interestingly enough, what always interested me about Neil was, what interested him the most wasn't walking on the lunar surface, it was flying to the moon. First and foremost, he was an absolutely fabulous, by all accounts, test pilot, and that's what really interested him. And he flew, I think, over 200 different types of aircraft, and started off his NASA career as, once he'd been a test pilot, flying the X-15, which was a supersonic rocket jet, if you like, that was dropped from the wing of an aircraft and flown right up to the edge of space. And some of the first classified astronauts were the pilots of the X-15, and that's how he started off. So a very illustrious career, totally dedicated to what it is he did. Obviously known for being the first man on the moon. I think slightly misconstrued, slightly misunderstood by the press. Although perhaps the most mysterious thing I always think about Neil Armstrong is if you had been sitting on a train and he'd been sitting across from you, I doubt there would have been anybody in the carriage who would have recognized him or even known him. And yet billions of people know who the first man on the moon was. So in some respects, I think it's hats off to him that he was able to keep himself sort of relatively out of the limelight.
Yes, very much so. May I duck in with one more thing about why he was the first person on the moon? Just 3 or 4 months before the landing, when Apollo 11 crew had long been chosen, and now it became more and more obvious that 11 was going to be the one that actually landed on the moon. Up till that point, Buzz Aldrin believed he was going to be the first person on the moon. And I'll tell you why. Even though Neil Armstrong was the commander, normally the protocol was the commander stays with the ship and the other guy goes out. That's how they always did it in the Gemini program. And not only that, but Buzz Aldrin was going to be situated by the hatch in this very cramped lunar lander, and assumed that because of those two traditions that he would be the first person on the moon. And he was a little bit shocked to be told by Armstrong, nope, Armstrong was going to use his commander's privilege to say, no, I'm going to be the first out, even if it means climbing over you to get to the hatch. And of course, Buzz Aldrin put on a good game face about it, but if you ever speak to him at length, it's one of the things that he's not completely happy about. And despite Neil Armstrong being the total gentleman that he was, and you can't speak highly enough about him, obviously he had enough pride or ego or awareness of history, as I think we all would if we were in his situation. How many of us would not exercise our commander's privilege and say to the other guy, no, I'm going out first?
I think that's right. The one thing to pick up on though, Bob, with that is I'm not actually sure that was Armstrong's decision. I think it was actually the chief astronaut at the time and NASA's decision with regards to who would actually go out first. And I think Armstrong was told that he would be the first out of the door. And of course, that probably put him in a rather uncomfortable position. But you know, I think I've heard otherwise in the research I did, but I know that you've done research too for your film. In fact, I'd like to, before you continue, I'd like to remind our listeners and viewers that Duncan Copp here is not just a filmmaker about the moon. He also has a PhD in astronomy. He's a doctorate in astronomy. So this is a guy who really knows what he's talking about. Well, that's very kind of you, Bob. I wish I'd got to meet Armstrong to ask him face to face. And you're quite right. It's sort of it's lost in the annals of time now as to what exactly happened, and only the men who were involved really know what happened. But I think that the salient thing, the important thing to remember, is the two of them went down together. They both helped each other. It was a joint effort, if you like. One couldn't have done it without the other. In fact, they couldn't have done it without Mike Collins up in the command module. So right. The three of them, really, the way I always see it, is the three of them, a bit like the rocket. You know, they're the pinnacle. They're the pinnacle of 400,000 very dedicated men and women who made the Apollo project happen. And you know, I think really, looking back, everybody should bathe and bask in that glory, and what an incredible achievement it was 43 years ago now.
Yes, articulately put, Duncan. And do you know what they did? Those two guys did once the engines were shut off and they were actually on the moon. They had made it. They turned to each other. They said nothing, and they just shook hands.
Exactly.
They quietly just shook hands, like, we did it.
Hey guys, I want to let everyone know, if you go to the homepage right now, Matt's got a fascinating solar feed going. Another image he's got up there. It's pretty cool, and maybe he can come in and talk to us about it as well. I also want to let you know about Operation My Sky. If you're on the homepage, you can see some of the banners going on, or if you click the membership button on the Slooh homepage, we're going to be releasing our new Slooh iPad app later this year, and we're basically doing a pre-promotion through it. So all the program that Slooh does is not, it's paid for basically by membership. All the stuff that we produce, we require membership to help pay for it, and what we need for you guys to do is seriously consider some of the stuff that's going on at slooh.com/mysky. We've got a lot of cool programs we're offering, including free telescopes for membership. There's a lot of different levels. We got a classroom program in there, the sponsor a classroom where Slooh will give the whole class books as well as activity cards. You have an opportunity to come on our total solar eclipse broadcast. You can even have some one-on-one time with Bob and Duncan and Lucy Green. So we've got a lot of different things going on that we're doing. Please support. Any amount that you can do would be great. But, you know, we have over 100,000 likes on our homepage right now. We've had, you know, we've been around since 2003. You know, if we get 10% of those individuals providing $10 into this program, it's going to make a huge difference for Slooh, for both our telescope networks, but also free programming. So please consider it in some capacity, either by going on slooh.com and signing up for a membership there, or participating in our My Sky campaign. It's a huge thing for Slooh, and we appreciate anything you guys can do out there to help us. That'd be awesome. So, Bob, what do you guys... Oh, go ahead, Bob.
I just wanted to say that Matt Francis, who is with us providing these solar feeds, was actually one of the last people to see Neil Armstrong alive. He saw them just before his heart surgery, which unfortunately he did not survive. And this image that we're seeing right now is our own Matt Francis, my buddy, and our Slooh guy who's giving us these solar feeds on the left. And of course, there's Neil, and he still has that impish smile. Don't you think, Duncan? He still has that look that he had back when he was in his early 30s.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to think he walked on the moon when he was 38, I think, or something like that. I mean, what, you know, you have to think about what effect that must have on you. It must be an amazing thing. You fly to... it's very difficult to understand, perhaps, what these astronauts went through, because when you talk to them, they always say to you, well, it was our job. It's what we were paid to do. It's what we were training to do. And I think it's really interesting that, absolutely, at that time, they were incredibly focused. The event hadn't happened. They hadn't got to the moon. The world was interested, but, you know, not perhaps that interested. But of course, as soon as they achieved the goal, and it did happen, the whole of the world saw them in a very, very different light, in a light that they could never escape from. So their lives were very much changed by, in the case of Neil Armstrong, just over 3 hours on the lunar surface.
Yes. And all in different ways, because the the dozen men who were on the moon, boy, they turned into a very, very different motley crew of characters, didn't they, afterward?
Well, I had it put to me that when they had achieved walking on the lunar surface and they came back to Earth, a lot of them said that the persona that they were before they went to the moon became very much magnified when they returned to Earth. So, for example, if you talk to Charlie Duke, Charlie had a passing faith before he went to the moon, but he told me that when he came back to Earth, his faith became much, much stronger. Alan Bean used to like to sketch. He was interested in art before he went to the moon. When he came back to the Earth after he'd walked on the moon with Apollo 12, you know, his art became quintessential to his life. Something that
and what about Edgar Mitchell? Let's not ignore him.
Yeah, Edgar Mitchell had a passing interest in ESP and in how the mind worked. And again, when he came back, that was elevated. So it was almost as if the the process of training and then walking on the lunar surface and actually seeing the Earth and being able to blot it out with your thumbnail suddenly alleviated them of all the sort of worldly strife in some respects, so that they could really focus on what it was they wanted to be. I mean, like one of them said to me, I mean, how do you top it? How do you come back to Earth and top walking on the moon? Not from necessarily a career point of view, but from a personal point of view. And I find that quite interesting. And quite a few of them alluded that to us when we were talking to them and filming In the Shadow of the Moon. Buzz Aldrin said, you know, now he has to live with that for the rest of his life.
And he did not do well with it at first, did he?
No, he didn't. But to be fair, I think it's quite a cumbersome thing to live with, and I think really this is the sheer this is what's particularly interesting about Armstrong, is he managed his life after his lunar landing, after walking on the moon, without letting this sort of destroy his life, or maybe destroy is the wrong word, but you know, interfere. He was very measured and very able to keep level-headed, if you like, where around him everybody was almost treating him like a deity. And I remember Mike Collins was talking about autograph signing, and Mike Collins is the most amazing raconteur. He's incredibly funny, and if you get to read his book, Carrying the Fire, which is his own personal story about being
a wonderful book. I read it.
It's a great book. Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
He may have been the most articulate, erudite, and maybe arguably intelligent of all the astronauts.
It's certainly a great, and very self-deprecating in many ways, considering what he did. You know, he'll always be the first to sort of say, hey, you know, even I didn't screw up, was one of his lines in The Shadow of the Moon, which I thought was wonderful. You know, it all worked. Even I didn't screw up.
Hey, how about here's something a little spooky for you. You know, we all assume, you have, Duncan, and I have as well, that it was the training, it was going to the moon, it was being humbled by seeing the Earth in the distance, it was the accomplishment of being one of only a dozen people on the world who have done that, that changed and intensified these people's lives. But what if the moon itself has an effect on people, being there? I mean, I don't believe that for a second, but that's never given as a hypothesis that if you've been to the moon itself changes you.
Well, I mean, who knows? But we know the moon has a very big influence on us on Earth. I mean, you know, one reason that perhaps life got going here on Earth is because we had this very big sister body, you know, our moon, which is comparatively big compared to other moons. Bob, you'll know all about this, you know, and it has this stabilizing effect. If you look at a planet like Mars, which has 2 moons, but really they're tiny, they're little chunks of rock, Phobos and Deimos. Mars is the way that Mars, its orientation around its axis, it's sort of tipped all over the place during its history, and of course that's not good if you're trying to get life started, because life doesn't like that kind of thing. Whereas we've had this big old moon up there that's always been pretty large, and its gravity has helped to stabilize the Earth over millennia, over many millions of years, and that may be one of the reasons why life was able to get going here on this planet. And you know, the whole terminology of the moon, it permeates literature, you know, lunar and lunar cycles, and it's really had a very big impact on our lives, and still does today. And
especially in the 1960s when they went there, we had one of the big quarterbacks was Moon. We had the Reverend Sun Young Moon. In college campuses, people were mooning each other.
Well, I think Aldrin's mother's maiden name was Moon.
yes, right.
Is that right, Bob?
Yes, one of them was, yes.
Something like that. There is a connection there, which I always think is just incredible.
Hey guys, let me jump in here really quick. If you're just joining us, we're on live. We are pulling live feeds from 2 observatories around the world. One in the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa. That's our lunar feeds tonight. And the solar feed you're seeing is from Prescott Observatory in Arizona. We're with Bob Berman, longtime Slooh editor and Astronomy Magazine columnist, and we have Duncan Copp, documentary filmmaker of many movies as well, all about the Apollo program. We have Matt. Matt, if you're there, when was that picture taken with you, with Neil Armstrong, just by the way?
This was taken about a month ago at a celebration at Lowell Observatory where Neil had done some of his astronaut training, and he agreed to come out and speak at Lowell for the first light celebration of their new Discovery Channel telescope. And yeah, humble is beyond belief with him. He described his role in the moon landing as a technician who placed mirrors on the surface of the moon so that Lick Observatory could measure the distance from Earth to the moon. Said nothing about him piloting the lunar module over the boulder-strewn field and craters, and after he had made that statement, the very humble statement that he was a technician, then they showed the video from the lunar module, and he narrated it for us, and he explained all the beeps that you hear in the background are the computer of the lunar module, which had less memory than our cell phones today, constantly complaining. These little beeps are like their complaints from the computer, and he's just ignoring them and piloting this thing over the lunar surface. And meanwhile, mission control is telling him, like, the countdown has begun, that you've got 60 seconds, 30 seconds, and then your fuel runs out. And I can't even imagine the kind of pressure that would have been.
Right.
But it was fantastic.
Well, you guys, let's talk a little about the sun, if you guys don't mind. I mean, we've been obviously focusing on the moon, but Matt, you got any images coming up for us, do you think?
Yeah. Well, the one that I've just that is in the reticle right now is the one I was talking about earlier, where you see a sunspot that is now on the eastern limb of the sun, rotating around us. It's rotating around to be pointing at Earth in, I don't know, a few days from now. But the first photo I had uploaded was of a solar prominence, and that was going away from us around to the backside of the sun. And this sunspot that you see on the eastern limb will soon be facing us, and it looks like a pretty big one. So that's exciting. And I'm about to upload another photo that's it's a sunspot that is facing directly towards Earth, and it has this photo I really love. It has a beautiful. It just illustrates the looping effect of the magnetic field lines coming out of the solar surface and looping back in. So I'll upload that in just a few seconds here.
And of course, we want to focus on this because we're only a matter of months now away from the expected solar max. The prediction is that May of 2013 will finally reach the next solar max. It's long overdue. Normally, the sunspot cycle is famously 11 years, but this one has been stretched out with the solar minimum that we've seen during 2005, 6, 7, 8, even into 2009, where there were fewer sunspots than anybody alive has ever seen. During this time, we had a brief reprieve of global warming. I know that in some circles global warming is controversial, but there's no question that the sun plays a modifying role on global warming. In other words, what it did was it suppressed it a little bit during those years and gave us a little bit of breathing room. But that's ending. I don't have to tell anybody that we've had very hot weather recently. 2010 was one of the 3 hottest years ever. And the sun is coming back, and that's what Matt is showing us now. This is the return of these storms that parade across the sun's face and send blasts, like shotgun blasts, of material. Now, normally there's about 10 particles coming from the sun for every cubic centimeter. That's about the size of a sugar cube. for all those who can remember sugar cubes, and they're not used very much anymore, but picture that volume with 10 little sun pieces inside of it. And that's the normal amount blasting from the sun. But when the sun gets more active, as it is now, and as it's increasing, we get more and more, and it comes at a faster speed, typically 300, 400, even 500 miles a second. And it can do us damage. Plus, it can create those beautiful displays of the northern lights. So the sun it will probably be far more in the news than the moon in the next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're on the homepage, Matt is giving us a fantastic shot of a sunspot, looks like, from his Arizona observatory. If you guys are on the Slooh.com homepage, please click that membership button and take a look at some of our memberships. We have a special program launching today for the next 40 days called Operation My Sky. It's focused around our upcoming release of our iPad app, which is going to be amazing. It's going to allow you to control basically robotic telescopes at a one-touch command. It's in development right now, and we wanted to run a promotion to try to get you guys fired up on it now. You have some opportunities to get into some unique membership levels that we don't normally offer, and including we're giving out free telescopes for certain membership levels. So please take a look at it at www.slooh.com/mysky. That's the program we're launching, and you have an opportunity to get involved with Slooh, which helps free celestial programming that we produce. You can see we already have a whole bunch of shows counting down. We do these weekly, so we love doing them. It's great. We have Bob on and Duncan and others come on to talk more about what's happening out there in space. Okay, guys, what's we looking at now, huh? What do we got? I'm looking at Team 1 right now on the moon on the homepage here. Duncan, what do you got? Any thoughts you'd like to talk about, either the sun or moon related?
Well, I'm just really amazed at that live feed of the sun. It looks incredible, and the way you're bringing out some of the detail there is beautiful as well. And you know, it always amazes me. We see the sun in a particular wavelength, and to be honest, not a lot goes on at that particular wavelength. But if you start looking at the sun at much, much higher wavelengths, for example, if we had X-ray eyes or gamma ray eyes, if we could see those kind of wavelengths, our sun would be far, far more dynamic than we see with normal visible light. And it's always slightly misleading, you know. You look at the sun, you think, wow, there's never that much going on. It's pretty stable. In fact, for a long time, there was an idea that the sun was very, very constant, but in fact we're learning more and more about our star as time goes on, and there's an amazing spacecraft out there at the moment called the Solar Dynamics Observatory, and it's almost sending back images every second, and they're almost IMAX quality. They're absolutely amazing. So if you get an opportunity to check out one of NASA's websites and you type in SDO, you'll see these just incredible images of the sun. So we're really learning about living with a star at the moment, which is a very exciting time, I think.
Absolutely. You know, guys, we're down to our last about 9 minutes from the live feeds that are taking place on the homepage right now. If you have any questions you want to ask, I will try to monitor the chat, the Slooh conversation chat. We don't monitor the YouTube chat, just so you know. We have our feeds going out all over the place, but the homepage is kind of the home base for this stuff. So that's where we'll answer any questions you guys have. Yeah, Bob, so let's see what we got here. If you got any, it says, how cold does the moon get at night or in the shade? Do you guys have any idea?
Yes. The moon, it's interesting. The number is almost the same day and night if you use Fahrenheit. It's about minus 200 degrees when you get into the shade for any length of time, and it's about plus 220 at night above the boiling point of water. Here's an interesting little fact about the full moon tonight that very little appreciated. We found out some years ago that the moon sends us a blast of infrared, that is heat, like a bathroom heater. And because of this, the lower atmosphere of Earth, that is our troposphere, gets 0.04 of a degree warmer whenever the moon is full. Now, maybe this is the cause of the fact that there is cloudier weather at the full moon. It's not that you could count on cloudy weather every full moon. This is a subtle effect. Nonetheless, statistically speaking, we see less full moons than we see other phases, and nobody quite knows why, but maybe it has something to do with that temperature business. So even though, of course, astrology has long been debunked, and the old views that people used to have centuries ago, and some perhaps still do, about how the moon affects us, the moon does not. The main misconception has to do with, of course, its gravitational pull, and people think that, well, if the moon pulls on the oceans, the ocean has an average 3-foot tide out in the open sea, 5 feet when it gets closer to land. If the moon can pull on the oceans, and our bodies are mostly water, why shouldn't the moon pull on our bodily fluids or on our brains and produce lunacy or these other effects? And the reason that it does not is that people don't understand that a tidal effect is not gravity. If it were, then the sun would have the greater tidal effect, because the sun, after all, is millions of times more influential than the moon is. No, what a tide is a difference in a gravitational pull. Because Earth is so large and so close to the moon, there is a difference between the moon's pull on the near side and on the far side. And this difference in its gravity is not what produces the tides, it is the tides. So tides are just a difference in gravity. Now, when you're standing, or I'm standing out under the moon when it passes overhead, what's the difference between the moon's distance to our heads and to our feet, another 5 or 6 feet further away? It's 0. So because of this lack of any difference in the gravity, our bodily fluids do not want to migrate from their customary positions. Our brains do not want to move toward the moon any more than a cup of tea on a table when the moon passes overhead. You don't see the tea trying to run up the sides of the cup and try to get toward the moon. It just doesn't happen. So that's the main thing we have to understand in really being clear about why the moon affects our oceans, and of course creatures that are attuned to the tidal rhythms, gulls, crabs, the predators for crabs, especially in the vast intertidal marshes and such, why there is that large effect there, but no effect on us as individuals, at least not in terms of a tidal effect. There may be an effect so far as light goes, because after all, tens of thousands of years ago, we were more prone to go out on dates at night, looking for a mate, looking for a girlfriend or a boyfriend when there was bright light. We didn't want to go out when it was dark, because some animals had better eyesight than we did at night, and our date could end early by being eaten. So because of this, we went out when the moon was full, and maybe that's why our bodies started becoming attuned. Maybe that's why the menstrual cycle is so very close to the lunar phase cycle. Although only one other animal, the opossum, has a similar cycle to ours, and then you still have a mystery. Why would only humans and opossums be tuned to the moon and the other animals not in that regard? So there's still some mysteries.
Hey, Bob, really quick here, guys. We only have about 4 minutes, and I just want to say a special thanks to Matt Francis from Prescott Observatory giving us live feeds of the sun right now, both in the Hangout and on our homepage at Slooh.com. I want to thank Duncan Copp, filmmaker, producer of many documentary TV series and films as well. Thank you for coming on, Duncan. Really appreciate it. Bob, author of many books, including the one, I'm going to do it again, Bob, just for you, The Sun's Heartbeat. I'll put it on the main screen here so people can see it. It's a great book. You should obviously, you can get it. Just look it up on Amazon. Bob's been with us for probably 5+ years. Also want to do another shout out to all the members of Slooh. Their membership helps fund the free celestial program that we produce, and we produce shows on a weekly basis on a lot of different things. This show, The Blue Moon, is something we had scheduled a month ago, but we wanted to add to it with the unfortunate passing of Neil Armstrong, and I definitely appreciate Duncan and Bob sharing some of their stories about Neil and the Apollo program in general. That was great. And again, I just want to keep saying it. We're going to be driving this all month long. We're doing a special promotion called Operation My Sky around Slooh's upcoming iPad app that's going to be, we think, change the way that people are going to explore the cosmos, but we need your help to be a part of it. So please go to slooh.com/mysky and learn about how you can help Slooh in this initiative, or just just become a normal member of Slooh right now. That's always good too. So we really appreciate it, you guys out there. We've got a lot of people watching tonight, more than we even expected. Everyone was saddened by Neil Armstrong's passing, and apparently the service was today as well. So, you guys, before we get off, we've got if you're on the home page, there's only about 2 minutes left. We're going to be flicking over to recap. Do you got any final thoughts, Bob, before we get off?
Well, this was amazing that we had this coincidence of the full moon, the blue moon, and Neil Armstrong's passing. I'm so glad that I hope we've done him justice in speaking of one of the bravest and most famous people when it comes to our exploration of the universe. It's a little surprising, and I'm sure it would have surprised him when he returned to Earth, that here it is, 40 years after the final Apollo touchdown in December of 1972, and we have no plans to return to the moon, even after these 40 years. We're not going back. I'm not saying that that's bad. By the way, hey, Matt, did we just see a plane?
Oh, I just saw a jet. Whoa,
yeah,
dude,
yeah, you did.
Well, anybody who doubts that we don't have live images here, there was the proof of it. We just saw a jet pass in front of the sun on its way.
Oh, that was cool, man. So, Duncan, you got any last thoughts before we get off here tonight?
Oh, very quickly, just to echo really the wishes of Neil Armstrong's family, which is basically such a beautiful thing to say, I think. When you go outside, when you see the moon smiling down, look up, give it a wink, and think of Neil.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What about you, Matt, before we get off here?
I just want to say I feel very, very privileged to be a part of all of this. I feel very privileged to have been able to meet Neil and be a part of Lowell and be a part of Slooh. So I'm looking forward to more shows and keeping this going.
Matt, we appreciate you always coming on. We've got shows counting down, guys, constantly. We fill the schedule really weekly with different types of shows. There's a lot of things happening in space. Some of it is not expected, and even if it's unexpected, Slooh still covers it because we have the technology and the know-how to do this stuff and do it quickly through our network of partners and through our own observatory. So again, before we get off here tonight, please consider membership. It helps us a great deal with putting on these shows and getting experts like Duncan and Bob. These guys don't come on. These guys come in and their time is money. Believe me, these guys are high-ranking people in their industries, and they are well-respected, and we love having them on all the time, along with Matt and others, and it's just it really makes these shows go. It's just we really appreciate these guys doing it. Bob, I'm really looking forward to the total solar eclipse. I'm curious to see, Matt, did you ever figure out your situation with your total solar eclipse ticket? Because I would love to add that to one of our perks that we're going to have that we're currently doing on the My Sky campaign. Let me know, man. I'm dying.
Okay, all right. We'll talk after this.
Yeah, there's a lot of these cool perks. I don't know if you two know about it, Bob and Duncan, but I've included you in some of those perks. If you go to the My Sky campaign, you'll see that you're in there, and we're trying to, it's kind of a way for us to offer people some unique experiences that we don't normally offer in anticipation of the iPad app that's going to be coming out later this year. Which is basically, Duncan, I don't think we've talked about it. It's going to give you one-touch command of robotic scopes right from your iPad. It's going to be pretty neat. Yeah, it's neat.
Incredible.
I was going to show people it while we got time here.
Hey, Pat, have you been noticing all these images that Paul is just quietly uploading?
Yeah, he's putting up a little show up there. It looks. I'll click over here in a second. Here, let me show people really quick while we're doing this. The show on the homepage is over, but they can still hear us and see. The iPad app actually is getting in the. I don't know if you can see that or not.
Oh, wow.
It's actually, it's coming together. It's gonna be really neat how it works. You can get more deep. Bob and I actually cut a show this morning discussing this very thing. So if you can probably see it on our YouTube channel, or definitely at this slooh.com /MySky site that we've set up for this. But it's going to be really neat, and we're really excited to get this out because I think it's going to really bridge this gap that Bob and I were talking about earlier today. Let's see. Is
Fantastic.
Paul got? Oh yeah, he's got some. He's running some stuff off. Those are live images coming in of what is that? What is that? The
Nebula.
Trifid? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a Trifid. Yeah, Trifid Nebulous coming in. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for coming on, celebrating this day of the blue moon and the solar, and paying remembrance to the great Neil Armstrong. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
All right, guys. Well, for Slooh Space Camera, this is Patrick Palucci. Thanks for coming on, and you're still looking at a live shot here of the sun. We'll say goodbye to the sun. Thanks again, Matt. I'll talk to you later about that total solar eclipse package I'm dying to put out.
Okay.
All right, my friend. Take care.
All right.
All right,
Good
Paul.
Bye.
Hey, Paul. Thanks, man. Before we get off, there's Paul Cox. Paul, thanks for all your help. I didn't know you were there. Slooh engineer Paul Cox. He was commanding the Canary T1 scope very well. I might add, very well, my friend.
I just
Great
want to
job.
say that for this app, I've actually bought an iPad. All right, I've been resisting buying an iPad for all this time, and just for this app, it's going to be absolutely awesome. Wait until you see it.
Oh man, awesome. I can't wait. I know Paul's crossed over to the dark side. He said he refused to get Apple Pro. I don't know why. I mean, Apple. He didn't like the Apple ecosystem, I guess, or something like that. He's one of those. He's a hardcore Windows dude. But yeah, I convinced him he better do it because it's coming out. So
Oh, your life is going to get easier, Paul.
Yes, exactly. All right, guys. Paul, you look like you got a nice little growth going, little goatee.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, look, if you shave it into a mustache, it'll look just like Bob.
No, I think it takes years to grow something like that.
Oh, okay. Excellent. All right, guys. Thanks for all your help, and let's get this going. Paul. Our next show is it looks like you've got one counting down. Do you expect one sooner? I know we've been working on a few others.
we've got a couple during the week as well. We're going to be looking at Jupiter with some Slooh members, so that's going to be pretty cool. That'll be on the homepage as well.
What night do you think you're going to look at that? Do you think?
It's probably going to be Tuesday and maybe Thursday as well.
Okay, so you're going to do that, and that's going to be out from the Canary Islands feed, or you think you might have a partner coming on too?
We will definitely have from the Canary Islands.
Okay, cool. All right, guys. Well, keep your eye on the homepage of Slooh.com. That's where all our events count down, and we update it daily, literally daily. You know, weather systems, everything changes. So just keep that's where you go on any device, mobile, Android, whatever you got. You can go to the Slooh homepage and check it out, and it's great. I don't know if you guys know if Paul's got his little tile up. You know, I can't do that. Just so you know.
Is that because you're using an iPad or an Apple computer?
No.
That's not why.
No, it's because I'm doing this from the Slooh Space Camera G+ page, and there's no way for me. It doesn't allow me to do it. It's weird. It only allows you to do that. So you see that, Duncan? You see that, Matt? You could add this in.
I was just going to write my name on a piece of paper.
The professional TV producer shows us how to do it.
Yeah,
Right.
it's called budget.
Yeah, exactly. The budget way. All right, guys. Well, our show is complete. It will record. You'll see a recording of it shortly, automatically, on our YouTube channel or from the homepage of Slooh, so you can watch it again if you'd like. And that's it, guys. Well, thanks, you guys. We'll be in touch. Matt, I'll be in touch with you. Duncan, thanks for coming on. I know it's late out there in the UK.
pleasure,
I guess it's
Paul.
late for Paul, too. Paul is in the UK, too, so it's late for those. It's past their bedtime, so get to sleep.
All right,
All right, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a
For
million.
Slooh Space
Good
Camera,
night.
Pat.
good night, guys. Have a good one. See ya. Hi, everyone. This is Patrick Palucci with Slooh Space Camera. It's August 31st. Thank you for joining us today to cover the Blue Moon event. Also, we will be doing a live solar feed of the sun. And in addition, we will be paying a tribute to the late, great Neil Armstrong. When we first started this show with Slooh on Slooh.com, we plan our shows typically, anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks out, and we were definitely going to always cover the Blue Moon event, as this is the last one and for another couple of years. But with the unfortunate passing of Neil Armstrong over the weekend, we decided to extend the show to an hour. And I fortunately was able to get not only Bob Berman to join us for this, but also Duncan Copp, who's a filmmaker with a lot of projects around the Apollo program, which he'll be coming on in about 20 minutes. But before we get started here, I'm going to go ahead. We're pulling live feeds of both the sun and the moon. And I'm going to click over right now to the moon we're showing. And with us, we have several gentlemen. Anyone who's been on any of our free shows on the homepage of Slooh.com knows Bob Berman. He's a longtime Slooh friend, astronomy magazine columnist, and of course, author of many books, including one on the shooting to the moon. And with us also is Matt Francis from Prescott Observatory in Arizona. He's actually giving us a live views of the sun right into this hangout environment. These will also be available on the Slooh.com homepage, these feeds. We are pulling them live, and if you go to the Slooh.com homepage, you can control these feeds yourself in the channel selector when the show clicks over officially, which it probably already has right now. And also with us is Paul Cox, a Slooh engineer. He's actually controlling what we call our T1 observatory in the Canary Islands, at a world-class site, which is about 8,000 feet up, and you're looking at a live image right now that I've got here, showing right now. So Bob, as we get started here looking at this amazing live shots of the moon and the sun, where would you like to start? Perhaps you'd like to talk more about Neil Armstrong a little bit, and maybe some of the lunar, some of the Apollo programs.
Well, of course, Neil Armstrong is famous from the very first lander, Apollo 11. Everybody knows that. But perhaps the best use of our time would be to talk about the little-known aspects of that first landing on the moon that made Neil Armstrong so very famous. And those who are controlling their own computers right now, go to the feed. The best one would be the low-power view. In other words, keep scrolling until you see Slooh's live, low-power, wide-field image of the moon. And that one, I think, will show it best. And the Sea of Tranquility, Mare Tranquillitatis, where the first Apollo astronauts landed on July 20th of 1969, is that dark blotch. The first, it looks like a double dark blotch just to the right of center. It's the lower part of it. It looks like a black hourglass or the number 8. Go to the center of the moon, just look to its right, and the bottom part of that is the Sea of Tranquility, where they landed. But there's unknown things about it that in writing my book about the moon, in speaking extensively with Buzz Aldrin, who loved publicity. Unlike Neil Armstrong, one of the things that we all admired about Armstrong was that he was shy, he was humble. He did not want the publicity. He did not want the interviews, and you can't really blame him because people were asking over and over again, what was it like to be on the moon? I mean, how many times can you answer that? Or did you get along with Buzz Aldrin? And there were some negatives in the program. We won't talk about them now, but he certainly didn't want to talk about them. So almost everything about that first landing that's a little juicy and unusual and interesting for us tonight comes from Buzz Aldrin. I'll just tell you a few things as we look at the moon live.
Hey Bob, can I jump in just really quick? As you
Please
guys
do.
if you're on the Slooh.com homepage, while Bob's talking about the moon, you might want to check out the solar flare that Matt just captured live at the Solar AZ feed. Just go to the homepage and select it. If you have a Pinterest account, you can pin that photo and send it to your friends. It's pretty cool, Matt. Congrats for getting that. Sorry, Bob, go ahead.
No, that's great. And I know we're going to be looking at the sun later. The sun is just exploding in some ways. You know, that's one of the great things about that nearest star is that, you know, it's the giver of life and all that. But on the sun, it's always the apocalypse. It's always the end of the world. And we can see that so clearly tonight. But back to the moon. Here's some of the little-known things that happened. I think everybody realizes that they were almost running out of fuel on that first lander, and the reason for that is that Neil Armstrong, ably steering the lunar lander down towards the surface, kept getting warning lights, 60 seconds left of fuel, then 30 seconds left of fuel, and yet the place he was heading was a boulder field that would have knocked the lander over sideways or on its side and that would have meant death to both of them. And beyond that, there was a crater. If you landed on that, you'd be at such an angle that it would again topple over. So he knew he had to get past those things, or at least to the right of them. So he had to steer it to that landing site. And once they got there, we all think that the first words on the moon were, you know, that's one small step for man, etc. It actually was Buzz Aldrin who said, okay, engines stop. Those were the first words from the moon, engines stop. And speaking of which, Neil Armstrong steered that so perfectly that he changed the design of the lander. It had legs, Pat, that were made of honeycombed compressible aluminum. See, these are some of the little-known things about it. And then Buzz Aldrin steps down on the surface, and because it was again a far distance, as soon as he landed, the impact broke the urine bag that was inside his boot. He didn't want to say anything because he had a live mic, but nonetheless, he had his boot filled with urine from that point on, and his walking on the surface of the moon could have been characterized as one small squish for a man, because that's what he had to do, squish around. So there are all sorts of interesting little-known things going on there.
Yeah, if you guys are just joining us, you can actually, if you have a mobile device, Android or iPhone device or iPad device, you can actually watch and listen to this broadcast right now live. Just so you know, we're here with Bob Berman, from longtime Slooh editor and Astronomy Magazine columnist. We got Matt Francis from Prescott Observatory in Arizona showing us live solar feeds, which I'll show you guys a little bit of. Matt, fantastic shots coming in. He's also, we got live images coming in from what we call our homepage viewer. You can look at those and flip through and control some of our own scopes, just the feeds of them, by hitting those arrow buttons. And we have Paul Cox from helping us from actually the UK, controlling our what we call our Canary T1 telescope off the Canary Islands, which is off the coast of Africa. So, and I myself, Patrick Paolucci of Slooh, are here in Los Angeles. So we're all over the world right now giving you this live broadcast, and we're actually celebrating, along with Blue Moon, the unfortunate passing of Neil Armstrong, and talking more about his life. Bob, maybe you should tell us a little bit about Blue Moon itself and what it means and where it came from. Any kind of background you can provide us? Yeah,
well, this started because of a misunderstanding in a 1940s astronomy magazine, and that it was actually and the thing was supposed to hit the moon with a little bit of an impact. In other words, as soon as he got the contact light signal on his panel, he was supposed to shut the engines off, and it was to drop the final 3 feet, compressing the legs. Well, right. He was so gentle when he landed it that the legs did not compress. So when he stepped out of the hatch, now the hatch was only 2 feet 8 inches wide, so he had to just barely squeeze out of the hatch and walk down the ladder. The ground was much farther than it had been planned, and that's why he had to let go and fall. He couldn't even see the bottom because it was in shade. And on the moon, shadow is pitch black. It's not like on Earth where you get some reflections and some skylight. Nothing on the moon, just absolutely pitch black. So when he landed, boom, that was quite a hard step. Of course, there's controversy over the first thing he said on the bottom. Did he say that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind, which would have made more sense, or one small step for man, which sort of made less sense? Doesn't matter. Everybody cheered. Even if he had ordered a pizza, everybody would have cheered. First person on the moon. Now here's where it gets strange. First of all, this was all done in prime time. The original plan was to have these two guys rest up after their lander, but that would have made them step out in the wee hours of the morning, and nobody in America would be up to see it. So the guys were all psyched up. They were hyped up. They were over-caffeinated. They said, no, 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 we're ready for a spacewalk now. So they went out during prime time in the United States. 19 minutes later, Buzz Aldrin did the same thing. And when he went out, he said, I'm going to leave that door open a little bit. And Neil Armstrong, already on the surface, said, yeah, that's a good idea. You don't want to lock it. And some of us were saying, was that even possible? Could they lock themselves out of the spacecraft on the moon?
Oh,
but
my God.
Nonetheless, these guys were talking about